Today we're doing a deep dive into Maurice Merleau-Ponty's The World of Perception. These were originally a series of radio lectures back in 1948.
That's right. And our goal here is really to get to the heart of these talks. It was Merleau-Ponty, a major 20th century philosopher, trying to bring his core ideas to a wider audience. He used, well, relatively accessible language for philosophy.
And it's quite a rich set of ideas he covers. It's not just dry theory.
Not at all. He delves into the body's relationship with the world, how space and things kind of coexist for us, and he takes a critical look at scientific optimism, the assumptions we make about scientific progress.
He even touches on things like the stickiness of honey or the experience of anger, things that seem mundane but reveal something deeper.
And the intellectual context is fascinating. You see echoes of or direct references to figures like Lacan, Heidegger, Breton, Bataille, Blanchot, Ponge, Kafka, Proust, Cezanne, even Sartre.
It really paints a picture of the intellectual ferment of the time, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And these lectures were broadcast on Saturdays, part of a program called The Development of Ideas. They were alongside talks on psychology, psychoanalysis.
Interesting. So broader than just pure philosophy.
Though, intriguingly, we don't actually have records of the specific introductions for each lecture. We jump right into the core material.
Which is actually quite special in itself. We're working from transcriptions based on his original written plans.
Yes, and apparently they even include his own handwritten corrections. So it feels like a very direct line to his thinking process as he prepared these.
Merleau-Ponty himself, he's known as a particularly creative philosopher from that era.
Highly creative. He was always trying to weave together new ways of understanding human life with reflections on art, literature, politics, a very interdisciplinary thinker.
And the central aim, he stated for these lectures.
He put it quite plainly, to rediscover the world of perception. That is, the world as we actually experience it through our senses day to day, a world he felt we tend to overlook.
Which connects directly to his major work, Phenomenology of Perception, right? The perceived world is central there too.
Absolutely. You can see these lectures as a way of making those core phenomenological inquiries more accessible, bringing them out of the dense academic text.
He actually lays it out quite clearly in the first lecture. He says, I shall suggest that one of the great achievements of modern art and philosophy has been to allow us to rediscover the world in which we live, yet which we are always prone to forget.
That world of perception, that's the absolute key phrase here.
Definitely. And we're drawing mainly from the book itself for this, including the introduction by Thomas Baldwin.
Which is very helpful context.
So Merleau-Ponty is essentially arguing against a really dominant way of thinking in philosophy, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Especially strong in France, going back to Descartes. This tradition that kind of elevates scientific knowledge, makes it the only real path to truth.
And sees our everyday sensory experience as, what, just appearance? Maybe even delusion?
Pretty much. Baldwin points out Descartes viewed perception as just the confused beginnings of scientific knowledge.
The famous wax example comes to mind there.
Exactly. The senses tell you about the shape, the smell, the hardness, but melt the wax and all that changes. So Descartes says our understanding that it's still wax must come from the mind, not the unreliable senses.
Okay, so how does Merleau-Ponty counter this? What's his alternative thesis?
Well, he flips it. He argues that this world of perception, the one Descartes is wary of, isn't some lesser flawed knowledge. It's fundamental. It's the reality we live in, but often forget or ignore.
And modern art and philosophy, he thinks, help us get back in touch with it.
That's his claim. They help us rediscover it. And this idea of rediscovery is absolutely crucial. Baldwin notes it's a central theme of phenomenology of perception, Merleau-Ponty's major work that came later.
So he's engaging with these big traditions, rationalism like Descartes, and also empiricism.
He is, but he doesn't neatly fit into the traditional empiricist camp either, especially not the kind that focuses solely on scientific observation or tries to reduce all thought down to just sense experience.
How does he position perception then?
He uses a concept from Husserl Fundierung, which means something like foundation. Perception is the root, the foundation of all our thought, including science.
But it doesn't limit it. It allows for more complex thought to build on it.
Precisely. It's the starting point, the grounding, but not a ceiling. He pushes back against empiricists who say thought can only contain what comes directly from the senses.
Okay, so perception is foundational. How does this relate to someone like Kant? Kant also talked about the structure of experience, didn't he?
He did. Kant saw that we need a priori concepts we have before experience, like space and time, to make sense of sensory input at all. Merleau-Ponty takes that seriously, but adds a critical element Kant missed, the body. Merleau-Ponty argues our embodiment, our physical presence in the world, is absolutely integral to how those a priori concepts actually work in our sensory experience.
Ah, okay, so it's not just abstract concepts structuring things from afar.
Exactly. He critiques Kant directly on this. He says, but Kant's conclusion was that I am a consciousness which embraces and constitutes the world, and this reflection caused him to overlook the phenomenon of the body and that of the thing.
Overlooking the body, that seems like a major oversight from Merleau-Ponty's perspective.
Huge. And Baldwin really stresses this integrating the phenomenon of the body is a constant thread through all of Merleau-Ponty's philosophy. It's central.
So we're not just minds or consciousness observing the world.
No. For Merleau-Ponty, we are, quote, a body which embraces and constitutes the world. It's the body itself that engages with and shapes our perceived world.
That's a powerful idea. He connects rediscovering ourselves with rediscovering the body, doesn't he?
Yes, there's that quote from Phenomenology of Perception. By thus remaking contact with the body and with the world, we shall rediscover ourselves, since perceiving as we do with our body, the body is a natural self and, as it were, the subject of perception.
So our embodiment itself provides a kind of structure, an a priori structure, presenting a world of things in space and time.
That's the idea. And he talks about bodily intentionality. It's not just passive reception. Our body is already oriented towards the world, bringing meaning into experience through how it relates to past, future, other places, other possibilities.
So perception is already meaningful, structured by our physical existence and potential actions.
Even basic perception is loaded with context and meaning drawn from our embodied life.
Now, emphasizing the body and lived experience like this, doesn't that open him up to the charge of psychologism? Just reducing philosophy to psychology?
He anticipates that. His defense is interesting. He basically says the psychological and the philosophical aren't separate spheres for beings like us. Because humans are transcendental, we're meaning givers, we constitute the meaning of our world.
So understanding our psychology is understanding the philosophical meaning of things.
In a way, yes. A psychological insight into how we experience the world is also a philosophical insight into the meaning of that world and our relation to it. They're intertwined.
He also makes a really striking claim about perception itself, something about it being a flaw.
Yes, that's a fascinating, almost paradoxical point. Perception isn't just another fact in the world. It's the very condition, the flaw, or opening that allows there to be a world for us at all.
Okay, that's quite abstract. Let's bring it back to the relationship with science. How does he square this primary world of perception with the world described by physics or biology? Does he just dismiss science?
No, not at all. He's very clear that science has immense value for technology, for achieving precision. He doesn't deny that.
But there are limits.
He pushes back hard against the idea that science gives us the ultimate truth, that it gets to the heart of things, to the object as it is in itself.
So what does science give us, in his view?
It offers approximate expressions, abstract models, useful representations, but it doesn't deliver absolute and complete knowledge. It's a certain kind of perspective, but it's built on top of the perceived world, not underneath it, replacing it.
It sounds like he's reversing the usual appearance-reality distinction.
That's a great way to put it. Traditionally, perception is seen as mere appearance, and science gets closer to reality. For Merleau-Ponty, the perceived world, the lived world, is the primary reality. The scientific world is a kind of abstraction, an appearance derived from that primary engagement.
So the rich experience of, say, seeing a red apple isn't just subjective fluff compared to the real scientific account of light waves and surfaces.
The experience of the red apple in the perceived world is the fundamental reality for us. The scientific explanation is a secondary, abstract construction based on it. Okay, let's start with that first lecture then. The world of perception and the world of science.
Okay.
He kicks off with this idea that the world we perceive, the one that feels so familiar, it's actually largely unknown.
Because we're just so busy using it, right? Our practical attitude gets in the way of really seeing it.
Yeah, and he suggests that modern art and philosophy have this job of helping us rediscover it.
And he points to a specific cultural background here, doesn't he? This French cast of mind, as he puts it.
What does he mean by that?
Well, a deep respect for science, for rational thought, which is great, of course, but it can lead to dismissing our actual lived experience.
Treating it as just appearance.
The scientific explanation of light, wavelengths and physics becomes the real thing, and our actual experience of color is just secondary, subjective.
Which brings us to Descartes. Merleau-Ponty seems to really grapple with his ideas.
He does. Descartes saw perception as, well, the sort of confused starting point for proper scientific knowledge.
Wax example comes to mind.
Precisely. The look, the feel, the smell of the wax changes when it melts, but the intellect grasps the underlying thing, the extended substance.
So for Descartes, there's a clear hierarchy. Intellect gets you to reality. Perception is just the messy beginning.
And Merleau-Ponty wants to flip that, or at least rebalance it. He wants to rehabilitate perception.
It's not about throwing out science, though, is it?
Not at all. He acknowledges its power, its technological success, its precision, but he questions its authority to label everything non-scientific as illusion.
He thinks science actually misses something important.
Yes, because it has to abstract, to schematize. It can't capture the full richness of the perceived world.
And interestingly, he suggests science itself is starting to show its own limits.
Right. He mentions relativity, for example. The idea that objectivity isn't absolute, that it's linked to the observer's position.
So scientific knowledge isn't this complete, final picture of reality.
No, he sees it as approximate, schematic. It's a powerful tool, but it doesn't exhaust reality.
So scientific laws are like formalized summaries of events.
Summaries that inevitably lose some of the event's concrete detail, its opacity, as he calls it.
Which kind of reverses the old appearance versus reality idea.
Yeah, it does. The perceived world in all its immediate richness becomes the primary reality, and science offers a valuable but derivative map of it.
Okay, that sets the stage. Let's move to the second lecture then, exploring space.
Right, exploring the world of perception. Space.
He contrasts the classical idea of space, Newton's absolute uniform grid, with how we actually experience it.
Yes, that Newtonian view is like an empty container, infinitely extended, where objects just exist and move around without affecting the space itself.
And he connects this classical view of space to classical art.
He does. Think about Renaissance perspective, or painters like Poussin. There's often that single, fixed viewpoint, looking into the distance. A sort of gaze fixed at infinity.
Keeping the viewer at arm's length, in a way.
It organizes the scene rationally, but perhaps not how we actually see things moving around in the world.
So who does he use as a counterexample? Cezanne, right?
Yes, Cezanne is crucial for him. He argues Cezanne breaks from that fixed perspective.
How so?
By using color, the way color patches build up form, Cezanne doesn't rely on a single vanishing point. He uses multiple sort of local viewpoints within the painting.
Which is closer to how we actually perceive. Our eyes constantly shifting, getting different angles.
That's the idea. It reflects a perceived world with overlapping perspectives, not one neat geometric layout. Cezanne is trying to paint the birth of form from perception.
And Cezanne pops up a lot in Merleau-Ponty's major work, Phenomenology of Perception, doesn't he?
Oh, constantly. He sees Cezanne as almost prefiguring his philosophical points about how the visual world comes into being for us. Of course, art history is complex, but this contrast works well for his argument.
He also brings in Gestalt psychology here.
The idea of perceptual constancies.
Like how we see a plate as round even when it's tilted and looks elliptical to our eye.
Size constancy, why people's feet look weirdly huge in photos taken from below, but not usually in real life. Our perception corrects for the perspective distortion.
He mentions the mood illusion, too, why it looks bigger on the horizon.
Right. His specific explanation involving horizontal planes might be debated now, but the core point stands. Perceived space isn't just geometry.
So the space we live in isn't the abstract space of, like, a disembodied mind?
No, absolutely not. It's structured by our body, by our potential actions, by our expectations about the world. It's an embodied space.
Okay, that leads nicely into the third lecture, focusing on sensory objects.
Yes, exploring the world of perception. Sensory objects.
He starts by critiquing the older psychological view.
The idea that an object is just a bundle of separate qualities, like a lemon is yellow plus oval plus sour plus etc., that our intellect somehow glues together.
He finds that too disconnected.
Very much so. He prefers Goethe's idea of affective meaning.
Effective meaning? What's that?
It's the idea that sensory qualities aren't neutral data points. They have emotional tones, they connect with each other, even across senses.
Like the mood a certain color carpet gives a room.
Or how someone blind might associate colors with sounds. There's an inherent interconnectedness.
He uses the example of honey, drawing on Sartre, I think.
Yes, to show this interconnectedness, the honeyed quality isn't just sweetness plus stickiness plus color. It's a whole way the substance interacts with us, with our body. It's slow, viscous quality.
It's a mode of being almost.
Precisely. The unity of the honey isn't some hidden substance behind the qualities. It is the way those qualities intertwine and present themselves to us.
Like Cezanne wanting to paint the smell of trees. It's about that fusion.
Sartre's lemon example makes a similar point. The sourness isn't just added to the yellow. The yellow is the sourness revealing itself visually.
So things aren't just neutral objects for us to analyze.
No, they signify ways of behaving, they call out to us, they provoke reactions, they shape how we act, what we surround ourselves with.
He mentions Claudel's interpretation of Chinese rock gardens.
Right, as expressing a kind of rejection of dampness, embodying a human attitude in their very form. Even dreams, he suggests, work this way. Their meaning is embodied.
So our relationship with things isn't one of detached mastery.
Far from it. He calls it a vertiginous proximity. Things are sort of clothed in human characteristics, he says.
And vice versa. Our inner states are tied to the world.
Yes. Think of psychoanalysis and complexes, how psychological states seem almost like external forces, or Cezanne's idea of a halo around objects. There's a deep entanglement.
He also mentions Francis Punge's poetry and Bachelard's work on elements like water or fire.
Yes, as further examples of exploring this rich, interwoven quality of our experience with things.
Okay, so Lecture 4 moves on to animal life.
Right, exploring the world of perception, animal life. He starts by recapping how modern thought science, art, philosophy is rediscovering this world of perception.
This renewed interest in our lived space and how objects seem almost human-like sometimes.
Yes, and that sets up the question for this lecture. Where do animals, children, and what he calls primitive peoples and madmen fit into this picture?
We should acknowledge those terms. Primitive peoples are obviously problematic today. And he doesn't mention women in this grouping either.
Definitely important caveats. But his point is contrasting the classical view with what he sees as a potentially more accommodating modern view.
How did classical thought see these groups?
Often as fundamentally other. Descartes famously saw animals as just complex machines, automata. Voltaire focused heavily on rationality. There was a sharp divide between the rational, adult, usually male European, and everyone else.
Descartes even had to explicitly rule out being mad in the Meditations.
It was outside the realm of meaningful thought for him. But Merleau-Ponty suggests modern thought sees more of a spectrum, a difference of degree, perhaps, between sense and nonsense.
Acknowledging that even normal adult life involves things like prejudice, fantasy, illness.
Right. Now, Merleau-Ponty still seems to hold a bit of a hierarchy. He says adult thought is better.
Mm-hmm.
But he does allow that we can gain insights from these other experiences. He points to psychoanalysis as an example of learning from dreams or neuroses.
It's interesting how that differs from, say, romantic ideas about the genius of children or madness or the noble savage.
Yes, he seems less inclined towards that kind of romanticization. Perhaps the experience of World War II shaped that. He maintains a sense of the value of developed adult thought.
He also uses insights from studies of brain damage in his main book, doesn't he?
He does, in Phenomenology of Perception. He uses those cases to understand the body's basic, pre-reflective ways of dealing with the world, emphasizing continuity rather than strict separation.
So focusing on animals specifically, he clearly rejects the Cartesian machine view,
Absolutely. He brings in Kohler's studies on chimpanzee intelligence.
showing they're not just reacting, but actively solving problems, understanding situations.
He talks about animals giving shape to their world, operating according to a kind of naive physics relevant to their needs and environment. It's a theme he explored earlier in The Structure of Behavior.
And he finishes by looking at the symbolic role of animals.
Yes, in children's thinking, in primitive myths, in religion. He uses that amusing example from Claudel about the Japanese print of the blind man and the elephant.
As a kind of counterpoint to Descartes, showing a different way of understanding something complex through partial embodied perspectives.
Precisely. A nice jab at the overly simplistic views of someone like Malebranche or Descartes on animal understanding.
Okay, Lecture 5 then shifts focus to other people. Man seen from the outside.
Yes, tackling intersubjectivity, how we understand others, and how that relates to understanding ourselves. He starts, naturally, with Descartes again.
The focus on introspection, the pure mind or spirit, that dual meaning of esprit, connected only contingently to the body.
And Merleau-Ponty argues this Cartesian starting point inevitably leads to a problem. How do we know other minds?
Because all we see is their body, their behavior, which is just an external sign of their supposedly hidden inner life.
Right. It creates a kind of fundamental alienation. We only know others indirectly, by inference.
But Merleau-Ponty appeals to lived experience again.
He does. He uses the example of experiencing someone else's anger. You don't just infer it, you feel it in the room. You see it in their gestures, their face. It's directly perceived.
And he argues it's the same for our own emotions, too.
Yes. Your own anger isn't some purely internal state. It's tied up with your clenched fists, your raised voice, your whole bodily posture. The feeling and the expression are bound together.
So he generalizes this, suggesting our own self-awareness actually depends on our awareness of others.
Fundamentally, especially through language. He draws on child psychology and Husserl's ideas about intersubjectivity. We learn language from others. It shapes how we think about ourselves and the world.
Language is this shared mediating thing.
So that Cartesian idea of a completely self-contained, pure consciousness, Merleau-Ponty sees it more as a critical ideal. It represents the value of freedom, of detachment, maybe, but it's not the basic reality of how we are.
What are the ethical implications of this view?
Well, if we're fundamentally intertwined with others and the world, we can't easily escape responsibility. We can't just blame external circumstances entirely, nor can we assume our freedom lets us remake everything at will.
It leads to what he calls the modern form of humanism.
Yes, one defined by inescapable ambiguity. There's an existentialist flavor here, isn't there? Talk of anxiety, the need for courage.
But he doesn't conclude that life is just absurd.
No, he resists that conclusion. He actually suggests using humor almost as a way to prepare ourselves for those moments of real, genuine connection that cut through the ambiguity.
Interesting. Okay, on to the sixth lecture. Art and the world of perception.
Here, he wants to build an aesthetic theory based on everything he's established about the perceived world.
Linking back to that discussion of Cezanne in the lecture on space. Modern art rediscovering perception.
His core argument is that the meaning of an artwork isn't about what it refers to outside itself. It's given in our experience of the work.
Even for representational art, like a portrait.
Yes. He argues the goal isn't just to remind you of the person, like reading their biography might. It's to create a self-sufficient spectacle where the person is somehow present in the painting itself.
The meaning is intrinsic to the painted presence.
Right. It lives in the lines, the colors, the composition as we perceive them.
And he tries to extend this to other arts.
He does. He touches on film, perhaps anticipating later film theory that valued its perceptual qualities. Music fits well, being largely non-representational anyway.
Literature seems like a challenge, though, because words obviously have meanings that point outside the text.
It is a challenge. His brief answer focuses on poetry, using Mallarmé as an example. He suggests great poetry creates its meaning within the poem through the sounds and rhythms and structure, not just by using words with pre-existing meanings.
It's suggestive, but maybe not a complete theory for all literature. You still need those external meanings to some extent.
Agreed. He acknowledges the reader brings expectations. It's perhaps less fully developed than his thoughts on painting.
Okay, finally, the seventh lecture. Classical world, modern world. A summing up.
Yes, a reflection on this contrast he's been drawing all along. He acknowledges that the modern view, with its provisional knowledge, its ambiguous art, might seem like a decline from the supposed certainty and finish of the classical world.
He gives examples of this contrast.
He does. Think of scientific laws. Descartes thought he'd found definitive truths, whereas modern science sees laws as models, always open to revision.
Or art. Classical works often feel complete, finished, while modern works can seem like sketches, inviting endless analysis.
Right. He contrasts the clear-cut passions in Racine with the complex, ambiguous nature of love explored by someone like Proust. Proust himself constantly questions what love even is.
And this unfinished quality isn't just in art or science.
Now, he links it to the sheer complexity of what we're trying to understand. He talks about a principle of incompletion, even in history, where interpretations always remain subjective to some degree.
And in politics, too, where words like democracy or freedom are constantly contested.
Exactly. He sees ambiguities in the realm of action as well. And simply trying to restore classical reason, he thinks, is a derisory response. It doesn't fit our complex reality.
But he also questions if that image of the classical world was ever entirely accurate.
That's a key point. Maybe it's partly a legend we've created. He mentions Valéry pointing out that even classical artists felt their work was never quite finished.
And Cezanne, despite seeing his work as an approximation, still achieved a powerful sense of completion in his paintings.
So maybe the modern condition hasn't discovered some brand new truth, but has just made a truth of all time, the inherent complexity and ambiguity, more visible.
Perhaps because of increased global interaction, shared culture.
That's his suggestion. We're more aware of different perspectives, the provisional nature of our understanding.
So what's the final takeaway or challenge he leaves us with?
He frames the real problem as, how do we achieve something meaningful and lasting like the best of the classical period, but within our modern context, starting from our modern experience of ambiguity and incompletion?
Like Cezanne wanting to make Impressionism solid and lasting.
It's about finding solidity within the flux, not pretending the flux doesn't exist.
Okay. So wrapping up this deep dive into Merleau-Ponty's world of perception, what are the core insights we've unpacked?
Well, first, I'd say the absolute primacy of the perceived world. It's not just a stepping stone to intellectual knowledge, it's the foundation of our reality.
Second, the embodied nature of our experience. Our body isn't just a container for the mind. It shapes how we perceive space, objects, everything.
And third, this recognition of inherent ambiguity in perception, in knowledge, in art, in human relations as central to the modern condition and maybe the human condition overall.
Which leads to a final thought for our listeners to consider.
Indeed. Given Merleau-Ponty's stress on lived experience, on this constant back and forth between ourselves and the world, how does that change what it means to truly know something or someone?
Moving beyond just definitions or scientific fact.
How does focusing on that embodied perceptual encounter shift our understanding of knowledge in our own lives? It invites a fresh look at our own everyday perceptions.
A call to rediscover that world he talked about at the beginning for anyone wanting to explore further.
His major work is Phenomenology of Perception, though it's quite dense. The essays in Sense and Nonsense are also very insightful and perhaps a bit more accessible in places.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration of Merleau-Ponty's thought.